Hello, I'm Don Keelan, and welcome to Civil Discourse. Along with me, I have my co-host, Andrew McKeever, and we have a very special guest today, Mia Schultz. Mia, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
To give you a little background on Mia, and rather than my creating the wheel, Mia gave an interview to my colleague at the Bennington Banner back in June, and he had written up a lovely bio on Mia, and let me take a second out and read that. Mia has lived in Bennington County with her extended family for about 8 years. She currently serves on as one of the commissioners for the Vermont Truth and Reconciliation Committee, a newly formed and mandated commission tasked with looking at discrimination in the past and how it has affected our current reality. We'll talk more about that later. She's also the president of the Rutland National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, that branch, the longest serving civil rights organization in the nation. What's missing from Michael's bio is the fact that Mia is a resident of Bennington, but also came to Bennington from the Southwest, from Arizona and California. You must like the cold weather. But thank you for being here with us today. Let me stay with Michael's interview with you, because he raised a question, and I'd like to just open with that, if you don't mind. And that is, this is a quote. Schultz said that while living in a place like Vermont can sometimes be challenging, she's also found it a welcoming community. Can you elaborate on that for us? What did you mean by that, both welcoming and challenging?
So obviously first of all, let me just thank you both for having me and inviting me to your show and to have this discussion. In terms of challenging, right, I'm coming from the Southwest of the United States, where we have more populations of people of color. We have a larger Latino culture. We have more connection to Black culture and other cultures from all sorts of places. And then to come to kind of a place that was really very homogeneous, like in terms of like the same sort of thing, cultural traditions and cultures that I was not used to. So it was challenging to kind of not be the flatlander. Like, that's the joke, right? That we're here to kind of invade the space of the bucolic Vermont ways, and we were sort of treated that way, and my children certainly bore the brunt of that experience in the public schools, being othered quite frequently. So we had our challenges. But when I speak to the welcoming piece, I speak to as we have settled in and gotten to know people individually as humans, and cross-culture, and been able to bridge kind of culture. We found that this small, brave little state has been welcoming to new ideas and new perspectives, while still kind of being challenged with the old ways of thinking and being.
Okay.
So I think in life, though, we see sort of these, different parallels happening, these dichotomies where one thing can be one way and you can have another way. It's never an either an or experience anywhere you go.
I was just wondering if you feel that the overall trend of racial attitudes in Vermont, and Vermont is one of the whitest states in the country, right? I think 95% or somewhere in that range. Is it getting any better, do you think, in the last, let's say, 10 or 20 years? Or are we kind of still stuck in some place where we need to do more work?
Well, if you would have asked me that before I was the president of the Rutland area NAACP for the last 4 years, I might have said maybe personally it had gotten better because I had been able to forge, as I said, new relationships with different people on a human level, right? But now that I'm sort of in the thick of it, I'm the person that people call when there's trouble. right? So I have a different perspective. I think, we're not all a monolith. We all have different experiences being in Vermont and living in Vermont. But in this role, in a leadership role and in an advocacy role, I'm finding that it's actually like sort of regressing in a way, because my complaints are going up in the schools, the complaints in employment are going up, and we're feeling even since the murder of George Floyd, where we really had a really racial reckoning, and there seemed to be a trend for people to want to do better and strive for that. Now we're in a kind of a place where, oh yeah, that's not as high priority anymore. And so I'm seeing sort of a regression from that. So I think it's coming in ebbs and flows, and it depends on the person and the perspective. But as me, in this kind of work, really very deeply embedded in it, Truth and Reconciliation, where we're hearing stories from people and the things that they've experienced in Vermont, I'm like, we got to do better. There's so much room to do better. Because there are some really egregious things happening in the state that you'd be surprised.
You mentioned the schools and employment, and could you be more specific about employment? Are there organizations in Vermont that outright discriminate, and not only organizations, companies, but medical, and that are discriminating today against the minority community?
I would say that's a yes. I can give you that it's not the blatant, like racism and discrimination doesn't show up in the ways that you might think it, like you might think of in the South, right? Where people are coming right out and calling you a name, right? I'm thinking about like right now in this moment in history right now, we have a black woman running for president right now, a black mixed race woman running for president, and she's already been within 24 hours called a DEI candidate or a DEI hire, right? Which is kind of a dog whistle, not kind of, it is a dog whistle for this is she wasn't qualified for that sort of thing. That same kind of manifestation of racism shows up in our employment, right? Where, we have to work twice as hard to get the same kind of pay. We have to, or even recognition. There's all sort of microaggressions and micro inequities where you see people who come in after you get promoted, and the ways that we've seen it throughout history, very in a microcosm in an environment that I am absolutely. It has absolutely ran people out of Vermont that I've known who could have been wonderful additions to our community, people with professional degrees being run out of Vermont because of these little small ways that discrimination shows up that aren't always necessarily those things you fight in court. It's he, she said, feeling, experience that happens that a lot of not just black and brown folks, but women and people with disabilities experience, and anybody who's marginalized.
Now, is that flagrant? Can you point out where in the state that happens the most? Is it up in Chittenden County? Is it down here in Bennington County? I don't want you to call out any specific companies on the show, but at the same time, we're going to save you from having to do that. But because Andrew and I grew up in the more than me than he, but when during the '60s and early, and even myself being before that, where we saw outright discrimination. There's no question about it, and segregation and what have you. But are you seeing any of that here, specifically in Bennington County?
Yes.
You are?
I am.
Where folks who may be labeled the minority are being denied services, employment, promotions. Yeah.
And a lot of times it's masked and covered in small things. Like you didn't you didn't sign this piece of paper, or you didn't understand what I said, or there's a shift in what one person says and what another person says, and there's retaliation. And I think some of the things are universal from living in a small town. When you know the next person to the next person, it doesn't just happen again to just black and brown people. It happens to people who are marginalized too. I think that there's a strong case for people who are lower income, who also kind of feel like they feel left out of sort of processes and advancement in employment opportunities because of it being a small town. Well, I heard that she said and this said, and there's these preconceived notions about who people are. And we know that as black people that comes just automatic and a bias. It's oftentimes unconscious, right? So how do we tap into that unconscious bias? Because a lot of people will say, well, I certainly didn't intend to it. I didn't see it happen that way. That wasn't my perspective. And yet if they probe themselves a little bit further, they might find out that they may have been biased in some of their decisions and picking people for advancements in their employment, or ensuring that people were safe during their employment process. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that it manifests. But like I said, it's really, really very individual. It's very, it's hard to nail down sometimes. It's
I understand
feeling,
that.
right?
I'm wondering, one of the areas that was highlighted, has been highlighted a lot in the last few years, is minority group interactions with police and traffic stops.
Right.
I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit. Do you see any improvement or any kind of recognition, at least, among law enforcement that, okay, we maybe we struggle with a bit of this unconscious a bit, and we see, you know, an African American motorist driving in a Mercedes-Benz at 70 miles an hour in a 55-mile-an-hour zone. We're going to give him a ticket because we need to check this guy out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or just for anything, having snow on their license plate, which is the case of Greg Zulu, who was pulled over. We saw that case happen here in Rutland County, right, where Greg Zulu was pulled over. This is a big case that the ACLU won. He was pulled over for having snow on his license plate, which was not even a crime. It wasn't something to be pulled over from. And he was then searched. We see an increase in searching for these pullovers. The data Stephanie Seguino from UVM has, released the data, and Bennington County was one of the places that was highlighted. So was Rutland, and in stopping disproportionately black and brown motorists compared to their white counterparts, stopping them more aggressively and more frequently, and then searching them. And so in the case of Greg Zulu, that happened. He was impounded, and they, from my understanding, they even changed the law so that now it did become illegal to have snow on your license plate. So we do see that this still does happen. I get reports on that on a regular basis. We also see where black people want to engage in the police for safety purposes and have themselves be protected, and they are often then turned into a criminal instead of a victim. And we just saw that on a national case, on a national wide, with Sonia Massey, and I'll always say their names. This is sort of my work to do. But we see that here on a microcosm in Vermont and in Bennington in particular. I have 3 cases in which people have come to me where they have, sorry, touched my hands person, but come to me saying that, they called the police for safety reasons, and instead of being protected, they were then turned into criminals. And now they're fighting their own cases for various reasons. So, the statistics will tell you, and I don't want to tell the particular stories of those because I hold those in confidentiality, but in general, that's what I see here.
But there is an advancement. There's a recognition of that, what you were pointing out, by
Sure.
police departments. I know Burlington now is keeping, they're not there yet, but they're keeping statistics on pullovers. So is Bennington, and in light of what had happened in the past, where there was just a disproportionate number of pullovers were done to minorities as opposed. But now, based on commissions and so forth, they are mandated to maintain statistics about what they are doing. Let me ask you this question in connection with what we're speaking about. You mentioned the NAACP in Rutland. One of the goals that you have there, as I understand it, is to share, and you can share with our audience, what the BIPOC Leadership Program hopes to accomplish in getting more blacks on nonprofit boards. You have a training program.
We do.
Can you share with us? Sure. Because the background of that is Vermont has the largest industry in Vermont is the nonprofit industry.
Yep.
In terms of revenue, and we have something like 8,000 registered nonprofits, of which 6,800 are active, and we have 2,000 foreign nonprofits, of which 1,100 are active, and it's a major sector of our economy, and you're looking to get more blacks on boards.
Boards and commissions.
Okay, let's stay with the nonprofits for a minute. What have you found is the issue there? I mean, why aren't there more right now?
Well, first of all, we don't have a large population of black and brown folks in the state of Vermont, and we can talk about lots of reasons why that might be. Sorry, let me get.
No, have you? Take your time.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me backtrack a little bit about the mission and vision of the NAACP as a whole,
Okay.
which is to be able to move the needle systemically in our systems, right, through government, through laws and policies, and through legal means. So a lot of the landmark legal cases came from out of the NAACP and the advocacy of the NAACP. But it's also to push systems to be able to meet us and see us as humans and hear us and our different perspectives. So if you're on a nonprofit board and there's only the same people making decisions about who gets services and who doesn't, and they don't have a lens for people of color, disabled people, queer people, any of the people who might be marginalized in our society, they're not getting the services that these nonprofits offer, not in a real holistic way or in a way that they can trust their nonprofit, right? So there's a lot of distrust between a lot of these organizations and these different communities, right? So having somebody on a board really gives you that insight and that perspective and that lens that's needed. So that's why we decided to start this program in this particular way. It actually started, the Bright Leadership Program started as a training program to get legislators, people to run for office. And so the first year that we had that program, we had trainers like Kesha Ram from the State Senate, and we had Arshad Hassan, who's part of Convey Communications, and we had several people who were teaching people how to be legislators. And in fact, as a result, we have our third black woman in the state House of Representatives now. When we wanted to do another iteration, we thought that there is a big gap in, like you said, in this big sector in Vermont, which is nonprofit boards and government boards. And so we decided to kind of shift to that so that we have the same success and representation. Representation always matters.
How is it's been developed a while ago? How is it going?
It's going great. I mean, we had.
Let me interrupt. Do you have members coming out or folks coming out that want to participate in that?
Yeah, I mean, we just started the cohort this this year, a few months ago. I think we're in our third session. It goes till May 2024. What's unique about our cohort is that we know that there are certain restrictions and certain things that keep us from being able to attend and learn things. So we actually pay our participants $1,000 stipend for being part of this program and for learning, so that it helps offset some of the burdens and barriers that we know that we all face, to be able to take these trainings. So we're not at the point where we have a graduating class for that yet, but I suspect that the reason that people wanted to sign up, we had around 30 applicants, which is pretty great because we only had 10 spots, because we only had a finite amount of money to do this, which we're still fundraising. I'll say that to the camera.
What exactly are you,
So-
do they cover in this training program to
Sure.
serve on a nonprofit board?
Sure. I mean, some of the standard things that any nonprofit board might need to know about bylaws and Robert's rules and things like that. That's very cursory stuff that you can learn from any program, but we go to the next level. How do you assert your power when you're in a room full of people who do not look like you? When there is a clear power differential, right? How do you stay centered in who you are and be able to offer your unique perspective and not be quashed by that? That's one piece. I mean, it's about empowering our people to feel the confidence that they need to have to be in these rooms. And that's really what most of it is centered on, as well as just how to navigate some of the paperwork, how to just various and sundry different aspects that are unique to being marginalized, right? To just be in the room and not feel pressed to go along with things that might be harmful to us. I hope that makes sense.
I'm curious. One of the concerns, I guess might be the right word, about Vermont is our population level. We're a very small state,
Yes.
and there's been a lot of interest in growing the state's population. In fact, we were just at a meeting earlier this week that Don's Foundation helped to sponsor, where one of the panelists talked about how the goal was to raise the population of the state to over 800,000 from roughly 640 or so now. Do you feel that the state government or other state agencies have made any kind of outreach to try to encourage more African Americans, minority groups to consider Vermont as a place to come to? Has there been any sense of that? I mean, there was a program a couple of years ago that paid people $10,000 to relocate here. I think it would help if you had a remote working job to do that. But have you had any conversations with state officials that said, hey, do you know some folks who might want to come here?
Well, there's really not been a hard time recruiting people to the state. It's about keeping them here. So
Keeping
keeping them here.
Keeping
So-
who here now?
People of color in particular, recruiting people of color, I was directly responding to that piece.
Okay.
I'm sure there's other pieces that keep like young people from staying here because there's not a nice broadband effort here, or it's not the walkability index, and there's all these other things that people who are much smarter than I have analyzed, right? But in terms of people of color, they come here, they just don't stay here. It's not a recruitment issue. It's a longevity issue. It's an issue of keeping them here. So going back to what we were originally talking about, the microaggressions, the micro inequities, if your kids are not thriving in a school, or if your kids are being attacked in school, called names, not racial names, by the way, and that's not being addressed in a timely manner or in a manner that holds anybody accountable or does any kind of education and puts a burden on you. Like if your health care isn't good, like the things that we all need to live and thrive in a community are not always there for people of color, right? I have to go, and sometimes my kids have to go an hour to Albany to get their hair cut, right? Like because there's no barbers that can manage their hair and know how to cut my kids' hair. If I can't get the foods that I'm accustomed to eating in the grocery store, I'm not going to want to stay in a place. If I have to go through all these extra efforts just to be able to live a peaceful life. I don't have community, for example. I don't know people that look like me and talk like me and understand the different cultural things, and we're all spread out apart, and I feel lonely. You don't want to stay in a place like that, right? So it's not a matter of bringing them here. It's a matter of keeping them here. And there's all sorts of things that go in with that.
What about housing costs? Is that also a
Housing
factor?
cost is a problem for everybody, right?
Yeah.
And then you add the extra, kind of burden that I hope that, number one, that the landlord will accept me, or I can buy this house, because there might be some fishy things happening. I'll tell you, I've had some issues of my own with trying to overcome some of the barriers of home ownership and pushing through what I perceive to be some blockades that might have been identified. And so, yeah, you add that extra end. Then when you get in the place, are your neighbors safe? Right? I had a neighbor who was not safe. Tabitha Moore in Rutland, who was my predecessor, she literally had to leave Rutland because her neighbor wasn't safe. Kaya Morris was not safe here as a state representative, had to leave her, and now she went in a different part of Vermont, both of them. But it's very challenging when you add those extra components to it. So housing is an issue for everyone, and then you add the extra barriers that people of color have to kind of overcome.
But isn't that part of the nature? I don't disagree with what you're saying. I mean, and I don't tolerate racism or discrimination, I should say, one bit. But but coming to Vermont, I see it in different forms. You mentioned it earlier. You're a flatlander, and we all are. And I also see, and we've had this. I mean, and I see it with the people who are wealthy. They're discriminated against. I mean, I know this for a fact. If you live in Bennington and hire an electrician, the cost per hour is such. But if you live on Stratton Mountain, the cost for the same electrician is going to be a hell of a lot more. Right? Why? Because they know you have money. You're discriminated because you have money. Right?
You think that's discrimination or just capitalism working at it?
No, it's discrimination.
Okay, well, but
And let me interrupt if I may. Also, because you're a flatlander, you're going to pay more, as opposed to someone who's fifth, sixth generation. It's the nature of the beast here. I've seen it and I've accepted it. I don't like it, but I've accepted it.
I just say we don't accept it. And I would say discrimination in the terms that I'm talking about are structural.
Yeah.
They have to do with hundreds of years of racism and discrimination, dehumanization.
Yeah.
But I'll just digress there.
Good.
I was wondering, the title of our show is Civil Discussion, and we've had these programs now for, I guess, going on, 3 years now, I think it must be. And, we began with this premise of trying to see, okay, how do we kind of try to bring together people with different viewpoints and different perspectives and have a conversation where hopefully at the end of it you realize, oh, well, this person is kind of, actually we do share a lot of things together. We're not really all that different, but, we have different perspectives, but we can now talk about it. I guess I just wondered, do you see attempts at civil discussions, civil conversations between minority communities and the white community happening at all, or the potential for that, and how might that work? I mean, the Braver Angels model is one that we've looked at a few times. We've had a couple of their folks on. And it seems like a great kind of method of trying to break through the stereotypes people develop about other groups of people, to kind of make you realize, oh, well, they're the fans of the same baseball team I am, and you start with something like that, and you realize, well, at the end of the day, they're just people like me.
And that's how I've been able to get and navigate Vermont myself, is that, as we said in the beginning, right, it's been challenging. We have had to personally go up against some really unique challenges in reference to our race and things like that. But the welcoming piece is those individual conversations. And I think that they start with each other. I mean, white people got to talk to white people about these things when they got to interrupt it. That's the whole premise of anti-racism, right? Is that it's not enough just to be not racist, that you have to be actively anti-racist when you see things happening, and you bridge these gaps between, like you said, these conversations, so that we can see each other as human. I mean, we have a long history of dehumanization of Black and brown people and women and all these sorts of things, and it takes these conversations to humanize ourselves. So I do think on an individual level we can do that. In a sort of a structured environment, that happens all of the time. Sometimes it's done well and sometimes it's not, right? And if we're going to truth and reconciliation, I'm going to bring us there, right? We are going to talk about things that might make somebody who is a white male property owning, heterosexual person, able-bodied person, feel uncomfortable, right? Because they might feel some sort of defense or responsibility or whatever the reason they feel uncomfortable, but it's the necessary uncomfort that is needed to make change. Because that is how we actually transform, is that we can say, my perspective is not the only perspective, and there are some things that we have to atone for, some things that we need to discuss so that we can move forward, so that we can mend these relationships and move forward. And so to me, truth and reconciliation is part of that process.
Let me cover that for a moment. Are you okay? That's the other hat you wear.
It is.
And it's a big hat, I should say. And for our audience, and I'll let Mia describe more of it, but I did knowing that you were going to be on the show, I did an unscientific survey.
Yeah.
Very unscientific, I might add. Okay, but now folks are in tune with what's going on in Vermont, and I asked them, tell me about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and they gave me this blank stare.
Yeah,
and,
that's my challenge.
And they said I had no idea what it is, what it's supposed to do, and why is it a Vermont commission? I never even heard of it.
Yeah.
All right. So, and for our audience, this is something that was created by the legislature in 2022, and signed by the governor, and the commission was the commissioners, which our guest today is one of the commissioners, was appointed by a committee that was selected by the 7-member committee. And 3 commissioners were then came out of that selection, and they recently the legislature approved a budget of, I believe, about $1.1 million for your service, for your operation, and you're to look at what's happened in the past, and not only in the Black community, but in the indigenous community, the community of the disabled, and the community of people who were sexually discriminated against, and so forth.
French Canadians.
Right. Thank you for mentioning that, French Canadians, because that goes back probably to the eugenics program.
Yes.
and so forth. And you're I must say, a state employee.
I am.
And there are 3 of you. Did
2
Patrick?
now. Patrick
he left, right?
resigned.
Yeah, Patrick. For our audience, was a or is a professor at the St. Mike's College, St. Michael's College, I should say, and he had been on the committee, on the commission. Why did he leave just after such a short period of time?
He found that he preferred the academia. The task is huge, and he found that this was a more comfortable place. Academia.
Can you officially continue without having 3 commissioners? Or?
We are.
Okay.
We
And
have
are you in the process of appointing a 3rd commissioner?
Yeah.
Not you, but the legislature.
It's a complicated process, so there's a whole lot I want to say to this. First,
go ahead.
So, first of all, it's called Act 128, and it was enacted in 2022 by legislative. It is it's the second state-funded Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the United States. So what that means is Maine came first. Maine, the other whitest state in America, they also did their own Truth and Reconciliation Commission where they funded it. There have been Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, but not funded by the state. So that is unique about us. It came out of an apology for the state's role in the eugenics and forced sterilization in the 30s. And folks were like, that's not enough. An apology is not enough. That's more performance. What does that do for us now? Because we still feel the effects of that. We have generations of people who are still afraid to go to the doctor. We still have these scars, these stories that are passed on from generation to generation. So the legislature said, okay, and they brought in an international company to sort of help them think this through, what it might look like, and they resulted into this commission. So yes, we were appointed, and here we are. We are continuing. The problem was that the initial legislation did not have a mechanism in it to replace a commissioner. It was very specific that it had to be done by a certain date in 2023, and they accomplished that, and then the team of the panel disbanded, and it couldn't be reopened legislatively because it wasn't in the mandate. So last session, we had to go back and revise that and make an amendment so that we could allow for the appointment of another commissioner. So that's why we haven't been able to do that at this point. It's all clear and go to do that now. We have, that amendment passed. We added some more things in our request since we were in the legislature anyway, which included options for confidentiality for people who wanted to be able to tell their story but wanted their names to be redacted and that sort of thing because of retaliation and all of those things. So that was sort of a push. We got a lot. The governor didn't like that, but we were able to get that through. So that's my long spiel on why we don't have a 3rd commissioner, but it's in the process, and we're making moves. We're doing things.
Now, it's just not the 3 commissioners. Or right now, there's just 2.
Right.
But
have
you now have an executive director.
Do.
You have a legal counsel, and you have a researcher, and
an executive assistant.
Okay.
Administrator.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you got quite a role to play here. And you have a timetable.
We do.
2026 is when you...
we just got extended because of the commissioner piece to 2027.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yes, that's what I said.
And will you be able to really accomplish all of this in that period of time? I mean, given you're covering all these different areas, not just the French Canadians, but the Black community and the ones I had mentioned.
Right. Yeah. And not only discrimination, we've got systemic, structural, and institutional discrimination, which are all 3 different ways that discrimination shows up. And so we kind of laugh like, oh, in 3 years we're gonna end all of discrimination. No, I don't see it as this. I see this as a beginning and not an end. We have a report that we will be submitting at the end of all of this, after we take all the testimony, take the statements. Our lead researcher is going to be doing, all of the history, the research in the history. We have access to records. We're going to be able to connect the dots between the history and the present day reality. and come up with a list of recommendations or call to actions. That's the reconciliation part. Right now, we're in the truth part.
What, I'm sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I was just wondering, you sort of answered this question I was sort of forming in my head here, but I'll kind of throw it out anyway. I mean, you mentioned at the start there that an apology wasn't enough. It had to be more. The damage that had been done was way beyond getting by on an apology. I mean, are reparations kind of what we need to see happening? I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about that in recent years. That
Right.
you know, broadly speaking, not just in Vermont, but nationally, because of the legacy of slavery and all the other discriminations that have
Sure.
been happening since 1620 or whenever the first Europeans arrived. Is that going to be something you think
It
is
could
part
be a
of the solution?
recommendation, but I will say we have to define what reparations are. A lot of times people might see reparations as we're sending out checks to everybody. Reparations looks different when you've lost so much, right? We're talking about loss. We're loss of generational wealth, opportunities in education for generations, loss of our spirituality. Because we were, taken from that, or that was kind of erased for Indigenous people, land, all these sorts of things. So when we talk about reparations, we also have to talk about what has been lost and how do we compensate for that. And that can be in so many different ways. It can be in, do we give tuition to people who come from these backgrounds? Do we help people with their credit scores and create programs? Do some of the things that we do kind of now, some of the remedies that our brave little state has been trying to do. As you noted, we have more things in place for policing, but there's still gaps because we still have disparities. And so how do we kind of like bridge those gaps and come to a place where we can look at what reparations and what repair means. Like
Although
that's
the
what it
Community
comes from.
Loan Fund is doing exactly that, right?
Sort of. I mean, you can't make up for hundreds of years of
No, I
generation.
agree with that.
Yeah.
But they have a program for the black community to give interest-free loans to start a business. It's somewhat of a pilot program. But getting back to Andrew's point, earlier this year in the legislature, someone from, and you probably know more than I, from Chittenden County, introduced legislation for reparations.
I know the people.
You know the people.
Yeah.
And that was a financial, much of that legislation was financial, where the state of Vermont would make a financial contribution. And it was quite substantial for our state. That legislation was not tabled, but not taken up, if that's the right word.
It sat on the wall.
Huh?
It stayed on the wall.
Oh, okay. Okay. Now, I have a few things. One question I would like to ask you about that. If I'm coming into Vermont, I like to come to Vermont, and as not as a second homeowner, but maybe as a resident, and I'm seeing that this is going through the legislature, where I'm going to be held responsible, tax-wise and what have you, because that's where it's going to have to come down to. Do I really want to be in this state where I had nothing to do with this? So help me with that.
Who is you?
Me.
You,
Yeah.
a white man who,
Yeah.
coming into Vermont, right? You don't want to, I mean, we're all responsible. This is a community. We are responsible for making sure and ensuring that all of us are cared for. That's what community is. So you're entering a community that wants to take care of everybody. Sometimes it looks like reparations. Sometimes it looks like healthcare. Or and at the end of the day, if we're meeting everybody's needs, everybody's good, right? It's not a you-me problem. It's a we problem.
Globally speaking, you're right. But and there are others. This is not the only issue people look at when they come. I mean, one significant factor many people we heard have is that Vermont has a $6 billion deferred maintenance liability coming at them for the schools, where they haven't taken care of the schools in Vermont.
So people are not going to want to come for that if they have
you
children.
know, it's a major factor. I mean,
Yeah.
so these things are looked at.
Yeah.
So, but again, more to Andrew's point earlier, will the commission, be looking at possible financial reparations? I know it's too early.
It is too early.
Okay.
And I would say that the reparations bill that came forth, yes, it did ask for a certain amount. We have already the Land Access and Opportunity Bureau that also received money to distribute money to people for land. I don't know if you're familiar, that might be something that you look up. But I will also say that, you know, there was a process for creating a committee to see what it might look like. And I think our task force to see what it might look like. And I think that was part of the legislation that went through on the reparations piece. And maybe that's the recommendation. Maybe there's recommendations that come out of this that look like we need to have the conversation about reparations and what it might look like. Because again, it's not just a monetary, it's not just money. It's talking, because you could say, you know what, I wanted to give you $1 million today, but and I could be like, that could change my life. Absolutely, that would be life changing. However, I can still go into the hospital and be discriminated against because of the color of because I'm a black person or because I'm a woman, right? I'm still pulled over by police. Like, money isn't the only pathway to reparations. It's a whole bucket of things, right? Because money isn't the only thing that we're missing. I could start a business and people could say, I don't want to go to that business, right? Because it's run by a black person. Like, I've thought about starting businesses in Bennington for myself and my family. In fact, my partner, he has a semi-pro basketball team, and he hasn't gotten a lot of support to get a home team court from the community itself. Right? But he's doing amazing things by bringing diversity to the community, entertainment, sports entertainment. And so how do we remove, again, those barriers that are very unique to marginalized people? And that's the repair that needs to be done. Sometimes that repair requires money, and sometimes it requires full overhaul of systems, complete overhauls of policies, procedures, personnel, that sort of thing. So I think it's a complete package, and you can't talk about money until you talk about the whole package.
I was wondering, the state has a Department of Racial Equity that, I'm going to mispronounce the name, Shoshana Davis.
Shoshana.
She's told me how to pronounce it 1,000,000 times, and I always mangle it still. Has that been effective at helping you advance some of your hopes? And
I mean, we work really closely with the Office of Racial. I mean, I do in the NAACP role. I've worked closely with Susanna's office, with the Office of Racial Equity's office, to specifically right now get like data to understand what's happening in our legislature. She keeps an eye on all of that. She has the governor's ear. All those sorts of things. She's not funded enough. There's just too much for one person to do. It's sort of like a catch-all for all sorts of things. So when you need advocacy, most people are coming to people like me. I don't get paid for the NAACP. I don't get any money for that.
I was going to mention that later.
I don't get any money for that. And yet it takes up about 40 hours of my week. It's a full-time job because I wake up with things that I have to address. I'm here today taking time off, which is fine. I'm not, complaining because this is the role that I've decided to take. But similar to Susanna's office, and you'll see also like diversity, equity, inclusion, and university systems and our school systems, where you have like 1 or 2 people working on so many needs. And when we talk about the Office of Racial Equity, she's not just looking at racism and the way that racism shows up. She's looking at how equity needs to happen in this state. And that's for women, people of color, queer people, people with disabilities. There are so many people who are marginalized that need their voices to be heard and laws and policies to be changed. And so thank goodness we have her. But it's again, like I just look at our history and, since 1619 and all, and before that, right? When Columbus came here, quite frankly, and took the land from the indigenous people, hundreds of years of dehumanization is not going to be repaired with one Truth and Reconciliation Commission, with one Office of Racial Equity, and with what it's going to take an entire shift in the way that we see the world and examining our own selves and our part in it and our own bias in it, one individual at a time. It's going to take a holistic view of what community looks like. Maybe we can rid the idea of what a flatlander is. I feel like I am a Vermonter. I have lived here 9 years. I pay taxes. I am deeply embedded. I've done my civil duties in this town. I am a Vermonter. We need to redefine what a Vermonter is. And yet, we're being made fun of nationally. SNL did a skit. Oh, where's the next place we're going to visit? I don't know if you've seen that. You should look that up. I'll send it to you. But we have this reputation of only being for white people and certain type of people. That didn't come from nowhere. That came from a history of kind of like keeping this beautiful state to one type of person and using the language of saying, you don't belong here because you are a flatlander and you aren't here for generations.
Now, where do you hear that? I mean, you may be working with a group that that's very present. I mean, I can argue on the other side, if you will. I have several colleagues that came here many years ago, black, if you will, and one is in a gay marriage. His husband is white, and they wouldn't move from Vermont. They just love it here. And again, these are individuals, and I'm just singling out.
Yeah.
But and to frame my question, I came here in 83 part-time, in 86, I'm sorry, 88 full-time. I didn't realize there was an issue of racism in Vermont. Now, that could be my ignorance, but I was very involved in the nonprofit world, in the business world, and so forth. And until maybe the early part of 2005, maybe a little bit later, that it began to crop up. And I said, I never thought there was an issue. Not to mention, not to be ignorant of the fact that cops were pulling over black people indiscriminately and so forth. I didn't have the facts, But from where we came from, I thought we were making progress. And now it seems like, and I think I may speak for a number of people, it seems like we're not making much progress at all. And the racial committee that you were talking about, and the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, your NAACP, they're here now to really help. Your committee was here long before that, but to better things. But am I wrong in saying that is this a new phenomenon? Has Vermont changed in the last 20 years?
It hasn't. I mean, okay, so let's go back to slavery. We like to, as Vermonters, like to say there's a big misconception that we were the very first to end slavery, and yet it was on the ballot a couple of years ago when we actually did end slavery for the first time.
Put in the Constitution.
In the Constitution,
Yeah.
right. And when we go back to when they did talk about ending slavery, they left certain caveats in there for children and other things, right? But they also didn't really force people to rid themselves of their slaves. We have a whole history of that. We've just recognized, for example, an enslaved woman who lived in Bennington. We just recognized her with the stopping zone. It was very amazing, but it took a lot to find her and everything. But she was there, and there were quite a bit of enslaved people. So I think we need to just really, we are living in the land of kindness, what feels good, right? We want it to be just happy, right? And like talking about some of the things that make us uncomfortable, again, doesn't feel kind. It doesn't feel nice. And so people shy around those conversations in order to get along. And in terms of like other people's experiences, especially other Black people's experiences, again, we're not all a monolith. Some of us see things different than others. Some of us don't experience it because we're in a sort of a bubble where it doesn't really seem to faze them as much, or they haven't had that experience. So I'm very careful to always preface, like, this is just the experience that I've seen. These are the things that I come into my world and my sphere, right? But because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And we do live in a culture where it just feels good to say we're all connected and this stuff doesn't exist. It feels so much better to do that than to actually confront the things that make us feel bad. At that ceremony where we honored an enslaved woman, a woman came up to me afterwards and said, the person who enslaved her was my ancestor. And I don't know what to do with that. And I said, if you ever wanted to talk about it, let me know. But we still have living descendants of people who enslaved other people in Vermont. We still have a legacy of complicity, right? We have this great history about underground railroads, right? But there was insurance and banking and wood and things like that were contributing to the slave trade here in Vermont, right? So we want to like only uplift the things that make us feel good. We talk about Jeffrey Brace out of Poultney, who was the first Black man to be a citizen of Poultney, and they have a nice plaque to him and everything. But he had to leave. His whole story is not there. He had to leave Poultney because his wife's children were indentured servants, and they were part of a fear and terror there, and they had to live in another part. They were moving back then, just like we have people here moving. Kaya Morris moving. Tabitha Moore moving because they had to run for their lives. That still happens in Vermont. And so you might not hear about it because it's not in your sphere, but it's happening because we don't want to talk about it. It stays silent. And that's what we hope to be able to draw out with the Truth and Reconciliation process, is to bear witness to these stories and so that we can finally reckon with them.
It's going to be,
Clock on the wall is tick tock, tick tock. The clock on the wall says it's.
Told you I'm a talker.
We have maybe a minute or two left.
I just want to mention one other thing. We have recognized it to some degree. The state has. Several years ago, the state recognized a Manchester resident for having served in the Black Marines, the Montford Point Marines, and received honored by the legislature, the governor, and the Supreme Court all on the same day. It's the first time in Vermont history that someone's been honored by the government all in one day. And are you aware that February, you're not aware of this? Oh my goodness. February 17th is Nate Boone Day in Vermont.
Oh, okay, nice. Okay, I do know about Nate Boone.
Okay.
Yes.
Nate Boone is a Montford Point Marine. And Nate was, he was here for 40 years, at least 40 years. Some of it part-time, but he's also the chairman of Hildene, and he actually followed me as a chair. But I wish more people in Vermont would recognize what he has gone through and what the state did to recognize it. Not that you can make amends for. In 1945, he joined the Marines and he was in the black unit. That was the law of the land. The Marines were to be segregated. Prior to 1942, there would be no black Marines at all in the Marine Corps, or mulattoes, or they refer to them as Indians. That was the 1798 law in the United States. Roosevelt changed that. Nate was one of the changes that came about.
I'll just end it and say, just because we've made progress doesn't mean that we're done.
No, we're not done at all. And I mean, for someone who was partly almost called up in 1957 to be part of the military unit going to Little Rock to let that girl go to school, let those kids go to school in Little Rock. I go back a bit and seeing a lot of progress. I know we're not there. I know we're not there. All right. Thank God the 101st paratroopers went in instead of me. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Yeah.
And you know, wearing these. I know the 2 hats. I'm sure you wear more.
Yeah, thank you. It was a
Thank
really
you,
interesting
Andy.
conversation.
Thank you.